This is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Percipient, and on today's show, I'm talking to the Chief Legal Officer of Crypto.com and the author of the AI Legal Handbook, Justin Wales. On today's show, we welcome back Justin Wales for a second appearance. He was on the show about a year ago, and the last time he was here, he talked about his then recent book, The Crypto Legal Handbook. Well, since the last time Justin was on the show, he got a promotion. He's now the Chief Legal Officer of Crypto.com, and he wrote another book, another legal handbook. This time it's the AI Legal Handbook. Just like his Crypto Legal Handbook, I highly, highly recommend that anyone in legal go out and buy this book and read it. It's thorough, it's thoughtful, and most importantly, despite the sophisticated nature of the subject matter, it's still very accessible. The main theme Justin relates in the book is that AI policy shouldn't come from fear that results in heavy-handed bans. Instead, when creating regulations, Justin encourages the regulators to consider 7 foundational considerations. Number 1 is that they should acknowledge AI's power and its economic significance. What he says is, regulators need to acknowledge that AI is an immensely powerful economic engine. It's capable of doing great things like saving lives and transforming industries. And it's not just merely a danger to be restricted because of its unknowns. Number 2, Justin says that regulators need to fully understand the structural limitations of AI. It ain't perfect. What he explains in the book is that regulators need to accept that AI has built-in technical constraints, the black box problem, and that, it makes mistakes and hallucinates, but you don't want to destroy its utility trying to regulate away these imperfections. Thirdly, he's got a common sense one. He believes, and I wholeheartedly agree, that regulation should be proportional. Regulators should calibrate their oversight to the actual risk that's involved rather than treating all AI uses the same. So for instance, there should be a certain level of regulation that governing a chatbot versus the regulations that cover AI that helps medical decisions or self-driving cars. Fourthly, and this was something he brought up in the crypto book too, regulators need to understand that AI doesn't fit neatly into existing categories and existing regulations. Justin also counsels that regulators should prioritize transparency over prohibition. What does he mean by that? He thinks that regulations should champion disclosure and open standards over bans that simply get buried in statute. Another very important concept that Justin says regulators should think about is that they should focus on the human action involved in AI use rather than solely the AI's actions. What he says is we should probably regulate human conduct and accountability rather than blaming an algorithm. And finally, again, similar to what he talked about in his crypto book, AI regulation needs to rise above politics. AI is a technology. It's not inherently bad and it's not inherently good. Okay, rather than me just continue on telling you about what Justin writes in his book, let's hear it from the source. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Justin Wales. Why a new book?
To understand why I wrote the new book, you kind of have to understand why I wrote the old book. So the old book, I had been working in crypto for, over a decade. The old book was just an outflow of everything that was in my head. And really, I wrote it as kind of a training tool for folks who I'm working with and outside counsel. More and more over the last couple of years, we've been working in the AI space, both integrating it into our company at crypto.com, but also working on specific AI products. And one of the things that I was thinking through was I don't necessarily have, or I didn't at the time, a unified theory of AI law, the same way that I did with crypto. So part of the AI project started from me just writing down what do I think about the development of AI, how is it impacting the practice of law for myself, and then I started kind of building that model up section by section, and at some point I realized I was just writing another book. So the AI handbook really was a way for, I think, me to understand in more depth and more detail how AI has been developing and how it's impacting lots of areas of my practice in the world.
How much and how did you use AI to write the book?
I tried to avoid using AI to come up with any ideas or to write any prose. I mean, one of the things that I liked about the crypto book when I put it out was it was very clearly in my voice, and I think that helped make a complex topic accessible. So very little until it was basically finished, and then quite a bit with editing, formatting type of things. And to give you an example, when both the crypto book and the AI book have, I think, around 400-ish footnotes, it might have taken me 100 hours, I don't even know, to put all of the footnotes in a crypto book in like blue book format, and to check all the sites and to make sure every comma was correct and I was not messing with the formatting from one footnote to the other. It maybe took 20 minutes to do that with the AI book. Because basically what I was doing is, you write the sentence, you drop the footnote, and you put like a little, a placeholder, right? Here's a link that I want to cite to. Here's a case that I want to cite to. At the end, Claude was basically able to take all of my raw, unedited footnotes and put them into a good format, and save me a lot of time. There's that. There's also, I think, a tool that I used, which was uploading the finished manuscript and figuring out, are there internal inconsistencies, like really using it as an editor. So that was very, very helpful, but I tried to avoid using it for the writing or contemplating, like, what do I think about these topics, type of things. I think that would not be as helpful to the reader.
Would Claude have gotten a good grade in legal writing for the blue book citation style?
Yeah, perfect. Just perfect. It's crazy, and it reminds me, like, when I was in law school, you have to do all of this, blue book work, and it takes so much time, and I think there's, like, a certain section of law students that really pride themselves on how specific they know the rules, and I think that skill is completely useless now, so you don't need it anymore. So, I mean, a good chunk of, like, the clout coming from law school, which is you're a great, citation editor. I just think that's completely gonna go away.
That's a good point because other than making a pretty site, nowadays it's hyperlinked anyway. So it's not like, I mean, the purpose of the Blue Book site back in the day was there's a consistent way for you to understand what it was to go find the book, right? And now it's, just click the link and you're there. Yeah. I never really thought about that. So you brought that up. It's interesting.
It just has to be pretty now, and in fact, I'm not using, like, exactly like a blue book citation. I try to come up with something consistent, but, like, in some instances, you don't even need all the information that they come in. So sometimes, like, just a site works well and it looks better. So, where I didn't think that the actual, like, formal citation was serving the page, I tried to change it a bit.
The last time we were here, we were talking about crypto book. It was fairly recent. And the thing you said still sticks with me. You said, if you want to be a crypto lawyer, you got to use crypto. You got to understand crypto. I was reading your book this time around about the AI. I think it's even almost more important now for lawyers in that same kind of mantra for AI. If you really, lawyers should really understand AI, not only for their own use, but legally, so they understand why it hallucinates, how it actually comes up with the responses it does. And you said that again in the book too. You said that basically the same thing is if you want to start learning about legal for AI, you need to understand how it works.
I think one of the problems a lot of lawyers have, and maybe just a lot of people in general have, is they're very quick to judge technology or content or an event or a person without really getting to know what is it and how does it work. So for me, once I started to understand that AI was not just magic in a box and really understand, like, some of the mechanics behind it, it made it actually more impressive and more useful, right? Because you can then sort of understand that some of the limitations are not failures, they're just infrastructurally how it's built and necessary, right? So there's a lot of examples of that. To name one, hallucinations are really a result of it needing to predict what the next
Right. That's
token
how it works.
is in a phrase, right? So when you understand that, it's not that the AI is lying to you. And also it's means that you have to, like, actually check to make sure that the thing that's coming out is correct. The other thing it does is that it, like, demonstrates too that it would be very hard, in my opinion, for AI to come up with something that's truly novel or truly creative. And why is that? It's because it's necessarily just like remixing something that's already in its database and predicting what is going to be the most likely next phrase. And you can, add some sort of, like, chaotic element to it. So it's not, okay, the cat is black. You can set the parameters so it comes up with something that's a little more strange than that. But it's all really based on something that comes before. And when you talk to truly creative people, their brains are able to think outside of that sort of box. So I think in some ways, learning more and working more with AI has demonstrated the value of human creativity to me. And I think that's something that we should take with us as we're trying to grow the legal profession and are continuously offloading more and more of it to technology.
Yeah, and when we're on the subject of understanding AI and how to use it, I just saw, I think it was a day or two ago, I saw a LinkedIn post that you had put up. You are a professor also. You teach at the law school there. And you said that AI, the way it's used in the classroom by the students, has completely changed the way you test and how you want them to learn. What were you doing before? And now, yeah, basically, how are you allowing them to use it now in your classes?
You can't stop them from using it where they are able to use it. So what you do is you have to try to find ways in which they can't easily have an AI give them the answer. So basically any type of written work that is happening outside of like an actual old school blue book and a pen and paper doesn't really work. Like I'll tell you, we had an online discussion board in my class, and it was obvious after like week one that this was like, the dead internet theory. Like it was just bot talking to bot, replying to bot, right? And then I was receiving, and I have done this for a couple years now. So I was receiving these midterm essays, and previously there was like kind of a bell curve of grades, and some people did poorly, some people wrote well, whatever. And almost every person in my class would win writing awards. Everything was just like so grammatically perfect. Everything was so good that it was just obvious to me that these weren't student papers. So we ended up switching to an oral examination at the end of the year where really what it was just a conversation with me to see if you can articulate some of the concepts that we were talking about in class. And I think that was like a pretty good way of getting around it. But it's a little sad to me because I think part of it is we put so much pressure on grades that the kids are willing to basically shortchange their legal development to get a grade because it's easier because they really need a good grade for whatever than actually going through the slow process of learning. And I think this is like a problem that I can go on and on about with society, which is the point is not the grade and the point is not consuming content. The point is actually trying to figure out a way of thinking for yourself. And I think that it's going to be a real disaster for the profession 5, 10 years from now when we've completely lost those skills.
How was the reception by the students?
What are they going to do? It's probably easier for them in some ways because all they had to do is have a conversation rather than fake their way through an essay, right?
Right, right. So you're the head of legal at crypto.com. You just mentioned you guys are working AI into some of the stuff you're doing. Before we get like back into the legal AI legal and the book and stuff, has your view of the interplay between crypto and AI changed since AI has become more mature? Because I think historically the first thought about the use was, well, crypto is going to be the financial rails for AI when you've got agents talking to each other and doing exchanges and stuff. Has that changed in your mind, or what's the interplay nowadays? Now that we're 4 or 5 years into it,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's really two areas. I do think that the like rails for agents is still the most likely outcome. I don't think we're there yet. And mostly I don't think we're there yet because I don't think like agentic technology has really reached the mainstream where we're allowing it to do unsupervised work at scale. And then the other is like infrastructure, where you're seeing a lot of data centers that were previously set up or are partially set up for like Bitcoin mining now being used to power AI projects. But for the most part, I don't see a lot of interplay daily. I think AI has a much broader reach than crypto has or could ever have. So to me, like AI is a broader term and crypto is like a little sliver of a technology and like a philosophy that I think they'll integrate because AI is going to integrate with everything, but I don't think in any way that's necessarily more profound than the way AI is going to interact with a lot of different areas.
even all that being said, which I agree, as I read your book, I still couldn't help to think back to a lot of the same comments you were making about legal, current regulation and current legal for crypto. Now it is for AI. I mean, some of the same concerns you had or have about regulation for crypto is equally, if not more, applicable to AI. Through the book, you went through several different layers of legal implications of AI, from the regulation to liability to what lawyers should know to be proficient in their practice. But at the high level, you had 7 principles that you think regulators and regulations should follow. Number one is acknowledge that AI is powerful and economically significant. Number two is regulation needs to acknowledge that AI has limitations and those need to be addressed. They should be proportional. Regulation should be proportional to what the use case for the AI is. And this is the one that really, well, there are a few, but this definitely resonated. Crypto regulation vis-a-vis AI regulation is regulation of AI doesn't fit neatly in existing categories. Number 6 was regulators should prefer transparency over prohibition. And finally, like you said in crypto too, it needs to rise above politics. It's a technology, it's not a partisan tool. It shouldn't be used as such. So I want to go back to number 1 is regulators need to recognize that AI is powerful and economically significant. But isn't the heart of that is why they want to regulate it in the first place? Because it's powerful.
I think when lots of regulators think of the word powerful, they think of dangerous, and they don't think of the positives of it. And I give some examples in the book, but maybe the best one is like autonomous vehicles, right? Cars that are just driving on their own, and we already have this. I mean, in LA, they're using lidar, right? Like if you go outside, you see like Waymos all the time, and I think self driving cars are going to be a part of the future, and then there's going to necessarily be folks who die as a result of a self-driving car. And we as a society need to figure out how do you proportion liability for something like that. But I think, the headline is self-driving car kills pedestrian, whatever it is. And then the thought is, okay, well, we can't have self-driving cars because they are going to cause harm. And yes, they're causing harms. But in aggregate, we could have 90% fewer traffic deaths because of AI and self-driving cars.
Why doesn't that come out? Like people, they see the few instances where AI has gone awry. It's been terrible, but human error is the cause of most of the woes in this world.
True, but it's the same reason we don't have, like, nuclear power, because even though nuclear power is, like, some of the safest type of energy you can create, you have some examples where it goes wrong and things do go wrong. So, we're not very good as a society, I think, of, like, balancing the positives with the negatives, and maybe for good reason. We're slow to change, and that maybe is a feature, not a bug. But, I think there are lots of reasons why we should be looking at this technology as overall a net benefit, even while recognizing that there are harms, and we should try to do what we can to protect those harms. But another example, and I raise this in the book, is a doctor using AI for help in diagnosing. Well, doctors are in like a tough position right now because if they don't use AI for help diagnosing, an X-ray for a tumor, right? For example, they could be held liable, or they could be found as having malpractice because they didn't use the technology. But then, if they completely divorce their judgment and just use it, and that technology gets something wrong, they could be held liable the other way. So we have to again like come up with a way where we can balance the harms and the benefits in a way that makes sense for people who are actually having to live a life in a world that is now full of computers that can do most tasks better than they can.
To this point, there's benefits, there's trade-offs. Explain to those who maybe haven't read the book yet, your number 2 principle for AI regulation is that AI has limitations that regulators need to address.
Maybe address wasn't the best word, but at least recognize, right? Because some of these you can address. So, for example, like we have a concept in AI called like a black box problem, which is the AI is trained on all sorts of information. It's coming out with a generative output, but we don't necessarily know or understand every piece of data that went into what that output is. So, we could ask the AI for an answer to a question. It comes up with a decision, right? Out of these 10 people, who should I pick for a job? And it comes up with the answer, and we don't necessarily know all the incremental steps and all the data that was used to come up with what that answer is. We probably can't create a system that has such transparency that we will know all of those incremental steps without making the ultimate results less efficient or less good, right? So we have to balance this idea of like, okay, we want more transparency, we want these rails, but we don't want to put you in a situation where we're making a very, very good technology that's developing somehow worse in order to fulfill some regulatory like box. And I think this is one of the problems that they're having in places like Europe, where they want to put like very specific rails and procedures around AI that I don't think always makes sense when you look at how the technology has developed, and also, could make the actual products worse. And the goal here is not to make the products worse, is to make the best products, I think, that you can, and that are also very safe.
You mentioned there, it bleeds into prefer transparency over prohibition. You should encourage the use of the tech, but have the creators of it be transparent about how the sausage is made, right?
But sometimes you can't, and this is, I think, like, a real challenge that we have, and one that I certainly don't have an answer for, which is if the world is going where I think it's going, which is more and more autonomous decision making, and you know that you can't vet every incremental decision that went into the ultimate activity, then how do you structure your world? Because a lot of your day to day interacting with AI, you're not going to be able to get around it, right? So you can maybe say, like, okay, this is AI, this is AI, this is AI. But ultimately, what will happen is just everything is going to be buried in terms of service, saying, like, this might be AI generated and you disclaim all liability, and this is going to end up going to arbitration and you can't sue us, and all sorts of other things. So it's a real challenge. And that's one of, I think, the biggest issues that Congress and the states are going to have is how do you balance the need for disclosure with just the inability to disclose, and also how we've structured corporate liability where you can basically bury a lot of things away in a manner that you can't necessarily get out of it.
Do you agree with this? One of the things I think that Europe may have right, and hopefully some of the other American regulations when they come to be kind of observe this too, is proportionality, right? In Europe, as I understand it, the laws are less strict depending upon what you're using it for. If you're just using it for homework, not a lot of risk, but if you're using it to save somebody's life and make a medical diagnosis, the regulation's a little more strict.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes sense, right? And I imagine if we end up getting to a point of federal regulation, there's that concept's going to be in there, and it's certainly sort of under the surface of the state regulations, like in California. They're treating different types of AI technology differently. It's just hard to know how to apportion. Obviously, if something is capable of driving, if something is capable of having a direct physical impact on you, you have to take that very seriously. But then you have like something like chatbot liability, where someone could be using this as a homework tool, or someone could be using this to discuss their mental health, and you have extreme amounts of liability coming from chatbots, and a lot of rules coming because children are using it more and more. So they're trying to apportion liability proportionately, but I think it's very hard in a vacuum to do so, because more and more, even a very specific tool is being used outside of its intended scope, and it's hard to, I think, really stop that from happening at scale.
So like crypto, the AI is moving even faster than crypto ever did, but it doesn't, as you point out in the book, current regulation doesn't really fit a lot of aspects of AI. What does that mean though? What do we do? How do we get around this that current laws may not be up to date or flexible enough to handle the legal implications of AI?
There's so many different areas. So I think the easiest place where we can create rules is around like professions that are using it. So you're seeing medical profession, the legal profession, right? Psychologists that are using AI tools, like the professional boards have done, I think, a pretty good job of like outlining what are good or bad practices and what is acceptable under your license. It's much, much more difficult to come up with federal regulations that apply broadly, and even state laws are all over the place. I take the view that this is still so new, and the potential harms are fairly contained, that we need to let this develop and let society figure out how we want to use these technologies before we undergo some massive, for example, registration system for agentic models that will necessarily hamper what you can do with the technology. We want, I think, developers to be able to use this and to build their own products from it in a fairly free way. And to the US's, I don't know, credit or detriment, because it's not able to pass something at a federal level very easily, as like I know from like the crypto space, we haven't gone and rushed towards regulation without really thinking about it yet. Whereas some other countries have regulations that I think are not very helpful to the development of technology within their borders.
Going back to legal, I'm kind of the opinion, I'd like to get your take on this. Just focusing on the rules of professional conduct. We're talking about how current regulations don't really always fit for advancement in technology, but I kind of feel like the rules, professional conduct, we don't really need many new ones, if any, because I feel like the old ones do work in this situation. Like you got to do your case research and make sure your sites are good, and you've got to supervise your associates, and now the use of AI.
You'd think that the rules about citing fake case law are already well established in professional conduct rule manual. Then again, like I think it's really an education. I don't think that most folks realize that like Harvey is still able to hallucinate. Now it's not doing it as much as it used to, right? So what I think is happening in some ways right now is a lot of the cases that you hear about, so and so big firm used fake cases. I think they're like maybe old instances now, not necessarily reflective of like how good the technology has gotten and how protective they are against hallucinations. Although they still do hallucinate. I think we just need to educate people more about the dangers. But every lawyer I know, whenever I talk to like a group of lawyers, they're talking about case hallucinations, and they I think understand the risk for the most part of the community.
And it goes back to the first thing we started talking about this conversation is it's really beneficial that everybody, but definitely lawyers, understand how the tech works, right? Which also bleeds into one of the last principles we didn't talk about is you say regulations should focus on human action and not the technology itself, which then bleeds into negligence, strict liability. Like all we've talked about is the humans, basically their judgment and how it complicates things. But where does the negligence, strict liability, where do we land there? Because as we all know, humans are subject to negligence, which is what would a reasonable person do in that situation versus a product that is generally strict liability, right? If it causes injury, company's often on the hook for it. But AI is a little different. It's a product, but it kind of thinks. Like, where do we ultimately end up on this?
It's hard because I mean, strict liability is such a hammer that what you don't want to see happen, or at least what I don't want to see happen, is a product that is basically working as it's intended to, is captured under like a strict liability framework, existential liability to the developers, and that product is basically killed because the human who was interacting with it was manipulating it in some way that caused some sort of harm. So I don't know what we do as a society. Generally, I think a negligence framework, understanding what the technology actually does and how it works is important. It gets really hard though when you end up having situations like a 15-year-old talking to a chatbot and the chatbot encourages it to commit suicide. Now, obviously, there has to be some liability for that, but it's much more complicated because it's reacting to prompts, right? And those prompts are causing this black box to generate things that you wouldn't want it to generate. So my guess is that like the chatbot liability will probably be more strict, especially if it ends up with like suicide. But something like a medical malpractice, one of the things that I talk about in the book is that there are some medical AI tools that themselves are basically insuring with malpractice insurance. So basically, if you're suing the doctor, the AI tool itself will have the insurance that will be able to pay any sort of issue rather than it being proportioned to the doctor who you want to incentivize to use these tools. So I think that's kind of a more interesting. But I think the chatbot AI ones are really challenging because they involve such like terrible facts and circumstances.
There's no answer to this, but I'm just going to ask. It's almost rhetorical, but is it the same? Obviously, strict liability. Let's use the example. There's a defective lawnmower. The blade does something and injures the person, and come to find out, the research like they didn't really, they kind of cut corners or they didn't go as deep as they really could, and that's what caused the defect that caused the lawnmower to be defective. I mean, it's a little bit harder to apply that thinking to AI because you're training it on vast amounts of information, more than the human mind can comprehend and remember and process. And you're trying to put guardrails on it, but is that analysis the same? I mean, are there parallels?
The black box of like decision making and content is one thing, but at the end of the day, it's also an interface, and you can put pretty good guardrails on an interface. So when you have a situation where it's a chatbot that you probably know that children are using and they're using the word suicide or they're talking about self harm, at some point you should probably be able to get those guardrails strong enough that it's being reported, or at least those types of conversations are not happening. And you could try this right now. I mean, go to ChatGPT and say something off the rails. it will say we can't talk about that. That violates the terms and conditions, right? Like you could try to generate photos of violence, right? It'll say it won't do that. So there are rails. So when those fail, then maybe the analysis is like a strict liability. I think it's actually much more difficult when you have something like a copyright or intellectual property question, and a generative AI is coming up with something that is like evocative of another artist. It's not like a direct copy, but it's evocative of another artist, and you could say, well, is this just infringement? And that's actually much harder because no individual word in a poem that was generated by ChatGPT might be the same as Wordsworth's, right? Come up with anyway. But it sounds so much like it that is it just a copy? And Wordsworth's probably the public domain at this point. But like you understand my example. That's hard to figure out because you don't know what exactly is it training. Does an AI have the right to parody? Does an AI have the right to be inspired without it being infringed? I mean, I can come up with a song that is evocative of Billy Joel that doesn't use any of Billy Joel's lyrics, but it just kind of sounds like those songs. And no one would sue me because you wrote in the style. Like you don't own a style. Is that the same with AI? And I think that's something that we're still kind of struggling with.
No easy answers. You opened the book with this, but I want to close out the interview with this. Is you say that when AGI comes around, the legal implications and how to regulate AI is going to be even more important than it is in the current state. Expound upon that. Explain why you feel that way.
Right now, AI is just a really interesting tool, and it's cool, and it supplements our lives and careers. AGI is like a complete game changer. I mean, to me, the idea of like AGI is it's an alien race that is smarter and more efficient and more effective than us in any capacity that we can even think of. And when that type of existence, if you want to call it, actually comes into our world, then how do we manage the governance model of our current world? So there's a lot of like great benefits. I mean, you can imagine science and technology and medicine are greatly improved, but it also, I think it like has like a fundamental effect on what kind of work do we do and who are we, right? Like, what is the point of many people's lives if they're toiling 80 hours a week at a job or 40 hours a week at a job that can be done so efficiently by a computer? Well, what do you do with the rest of your time? How do you survive? How does the economy work when no one needs jobs? Like, my stepdad is a truck driver. He'll probably be retired by the time you have completely self-driving transportation. But at some point, it's just not going to make sense to employ someone like him, right? So what ends up happening to all of the jobs? We have to figure that out because otherwise, like this is how the apocalypse happens.
We'll end on the apocalypse. Justin, I appreciate your time. I know people go to Amazon, but is there a preferred place that you want to send people to go get your book?
If you want a paperback copy, I'd say go to Amazon. If you want a digital copy, go to justinwales.com. And one thing that I'm seeing a lot of demand for are law firms and universities, frankly, like purchasing copies in bulk for their students, for their lawyers. So if you're interested in that, you can go to justinwales.com and send me an email, and we could talk about full pricing.
I'll put links to that in the show notes so
Yeah, thanks.
they can find it there. Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.